I didn't take it.
Yes, you did. I know you did.
Keep calling me old and see what happens. That's what Marco Rinaldi whispered in my ear after he heard me call him old, arrogant, and unbearable inside the company archive. The problem is that Marco wasn't just my boss. He was the most feared man in Philadelphia. While I struggled to pay for my mother's treatment, raise my little sister, and survive college, he seemed to find fault with everything I did. I swore I hated him, until I realized that every argument hid something far more dangerous, because the more I tried to run from that man, the more impossible it became to forget him. And I was about to discover that some people don't come into our lives to destroy them. They come to change everything we believed about love. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, The First Day in the Glass Hell. The alarm went off at 5:40, and I'd already been awake for an hour. I couldn't sleep right. I spent half the night in my mother's room, fixing her pillow because she was coughing, and the other half going over a financial administration workbook I'd borrowed from a classmate. The numbers danced in front of me as if they were laughing at me. I was already laughing at myself, silently, with the yellow light of the lamp burning the corner of my eye, and the apartment's silence weighing down the way it only does in the dead of night. Lily was sleeping with the pillowcase in her arms. She always slept like that, and she always woke up with the seam imprinted on her cheek. I kissed the top of her forehead, gently freed her hair from the seam, and slid the pillowcase out slowly so I wouldn't wake her, because today, for the first time in months, I had something that looked like hope. Today I was starting at Rinaldi Holdings. I put the coffee on. The kitchen fit two bodies squeezed together, and even so there was still room for the pile of bills on the table, white and pink envelopes I'd learned not to look at in the morning. The smell of coffee was the first good thing of the day, strong and bitter, rising through the cold air of the hallway. At night I'd look at those envelopes, count them, divide again. In the morning, I pretended they didn't exist. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, leaning on the frame, pale face, hair in a loose bun, the robe too big for the body that had thinned over the past few months. Did you sleep, Calla?" she asked, and her voice came out weaker than I wanted to hear. I slept. Liar. I laughed softly, pouring coffee into her cup and feeling the heat of the ceramic burn my fingertips. "Go back to bed, Mom. It's early. I just wanted to see you dressed." She looked me up and down, and for a second, her face lit up, even tired. "You look pretty." I was wearing the only white blouse I had, the black pleated skirt I'd bought at a thrift store near home, and the shoes that pinched the little toe on my left foot. Pretty was a generous word, but I let my mother think it was pretty. I kissed her forehead, caught the familiar smell of cheap cologne and medicine, grabbed the empty briefcase under my arm, and headed out into the still dark morning. The SEPTA train came at 6:44. I knew the schedule by heart, because it had been the ruler of my life over the past few months, between college, the hospital, and the previous job that had fired me without ceremony. I sat near the door, pressed my forehead to the cold glass, went over in my head everything I'd memorized about the company: Rinaldi Holdings, construction, luxury hospitality, investments, headquarters in the financial district, a 47-story glass tower, reasonable starting salary, decent health plan, transit benefit. It was the first time in years that a position matched what I needed. I wasn't going to blow it. When I got off at the right station, it was still dark enough for the tower's lights to shine like a row of white teeth against the gray morning sky. I looked up, and for an instant, my stomach tightened, as if the building knew I didn't belong there and was just waiting for the right moment to spit me out. I pushed through the revolving door. The lobby was cold, not the temperature, the marble, the silence, the way footsteps struck the floor as if announcing each person before they even entered. The ceiling lights were too white, too harsh, and everything there had the calculated shine of people who'd never had to save a dime. "First day?" The voice came from behind the reception desk. I looked up and found a woman about my age, brown hair pulled into a high ponytail, a smile that seemed too big to fit inside the uniform. "Is it that obvious? You're gripping that briefcase like it's about to run off." She held out her hand over the desk. "Bruna, reception. But I also fix the lives of anyone who shows up lost, which is pretty much everyone on their first day. Calla, Donovan, I'm here for the 47th. Bruna made a sympathetic face. My condolences, friend. I laughed without meaning to. That bad? Worse. She handed me my badge, adjusted the lanyard around my neck with the ease of someone who'd done it dozens of times. Look, rule number 1. The elevator on the right goes up to 47. The one in the middle stops at 45. Don't take the wrong elevator, because the stairwell exit is a marathon. Rule number 2. Don't talk loud near his office. His who? Bruna tilted her head. The smile faded a little. You weren't told who your direct boss is. They only gave me the name. Marco Rinaldi. Right. She squeezed my arm with total ease, like someone confirming a bad diagnosis. Rule number 3. Take a deep breath before you go into his office, and don't answer with a closed-off face, even if he provokes you. He provokes. Bruna glanced at the clock. Go up, friend. You've got plenty of time, but he times you. Literally. I didn't understand back then. I got into the right elevator, pressed 47, and watched the red number rise slowly while my heart beat faster than it should. In the reflection of the polished steel, I fixed my hair, tucked a stray strand into the bun, rehearsed the smile I'd practiced in front of the bathroom mirror. It didn't come out very convincing, but it was all I had. The door opened. The whole floor breathed on a different frequency. Dark carpet that muffled every step. Smoked glass walls that let the light in, but not the warmth. Dark wood desks, each one with a man in a suit typing as if he were in a hurry to exist. No one looked at me, and even so I felt that everyone noticed the exact instant I stepped onto that carpet. A woman in a tight skirt intercepted me before I reached the desk they'd pointed me to. Calla Donovan. That's me. Follow me, Mr. Rinaldi wants to see you before you sit down. Before? She was already walking. I swallowed the question and went after her. His office door was double. Dark wood. No plaque. No name. No indication beyond the fact that 2 people stopped typing when I walked past. The woman knocked once, opened the door, gave me a light push inside, and closed it. I didn't expect to lose my breath, but I did. Marco Rinaldi was standing in front of the glass wall, with his back to me. Dark gray suit, shoulders too broad for the harsh morning light. Black hair with silver threads at the temples that I only saw when he turned his face slightly. The whole city spread out behind him 47 floors below, and he stood there as if he'd seen it so many times it had stopped making sense. He had a watch on his left wrist, and it was that watch he looked at first, not me. It took you 3 minutes and 40 seconds to get from the elevator to this door. His voice was low, calm, the kind of voice that doesn't need to rise to make a bigger man back down. I didn't know I was being timed. I said, You've been timed since you set foot in the company. He turned. Sit. I sat. The seat was hard on purpose, or at least that's what I preferred to believe. The briefcase. I held out the briefcase. He opened it, flipped 2 pages, closed it again with a firmness that wasn't anger, but came close. Disorganized resume. Generic cover letter. You're studying business administration at night at the public university. Finished half your credits. Fell behind a semester for a family health reason. He looked up for the first time. Dark steel-colored eyes. No mercy in them. The kind that don't blink when they should. You're here because? I swallowed. Because I need the salary. Honest. He pushed the briefcase back toward me. You'll sit at the corner desk. You'll open 3 spreadsheets that are in your email. You'll reconcile the numbers by noon. If you get 1 decimal point wrong, I'll know. If you come in late tomorrow, I'll know. If you waste 5 minutes in the hallway chatting, I'll know. Are we understood? Yes. Yes, sir. I clenched my jaw. Yes, Mr. Rinaldi. He held my gaze for another second. It wasn't long. It was enough for me to feel the blood burn in my ear without quite understanding why. You may go. I left his office and went straight to the corner desk. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door. I sat down, opened the computer, and stared at the keyboard for about 20 seconds before I could type the password. 3 spreadsheets. Reconcile. Noon. It was 9:30. I started. The morning was a blur of numbers. Calls I answered wrong because I still hadn't memorized the extensions, and sidelong glances from co-workers who seemed to be gauging how long I'd last. Bruna appeared once, pretending to deliver an envelope, and left a chocolate in the corner of my desk without saying a word. I ate the whole chocolate in 2 minutes and felt a little less alone. At exactly noon, I sent the email with the reconciled files. Marco replied in 7 minutes. Line 412 of the second spreadsheet is missing. Redo it. I redid it. 2 hours later, he replied again. The footnote on the third one is missing. Redo it. I redid it. At 5:30, when the floor started to empty and the smell of fresh coffee was replaced by that of empty air conditioning, I was still typing. Marco passed by my desk without looking at me and said, without stopping, "You're still here." "I'm finishing." "Finish at home, then. The building closes at 7. You said if I got 1 decimal point wrong." "I did." He stopped, finally, and looked down at me. "But I didn't tell you to die in the chair." He left. I stayed another 40 minutes. The train ride back was crowded and hot, with the smell of rain soaked into dry clothes. I pressed my forehead to the glass again, on the other side, and called my mother. How was it? It was Kala. It was Mom. Really? Did Lily eat? Silence. Mom, I made rice, honey, but she didn't want it. She was waiting for you to get home. I gripped the phone tighter. Okay, I'm on my way. Tell her. When I walked into the apartment, Lily came running barefoot down the hallway and jumped into my arms as if I'd come back from a 2-month trip. I buried my face in her hair for a second, smelling cheap strawberry shampoo, and let it make some kind of difference. "And you took forever." "I know, sweetie. Sorry. Did you bring bread?" I hadn't brought bread. I'd completely forgotten. I set Lily down, went to the kitchen, opened the cupboard, found half a pack of pasta and a can of tomato sauce almost gone. I improvised dinner in 20 minutes. Lily ate, laughing. My mother ate little, her hand trembling slightly on the fork. But she ate. I ate the rest of the pot standing up, leaning against the counter, because sitting down meant falling asleep. After dinner, I put Lily to bed, told half a story, finished the other half by making it up. I covered my mother on the couch with the patchwork quilt she loved. I washed the dishes with the kitchen light off, with only the sliver from the hallway lighting the sink, so I wouldn't wake anyone. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my college notebook, looked at the microwave clock. 11:42. 4 hours until everything started over. I closed my eyes for a moment, rested my forehead on the notebook, and thought of his face timing my entrance, of the watch on his left wrist, of the way he said yes, Mr. Rinaldi, and looked at me a second longer than he should have, as if waiting for me to give in first. I couldn't decide if it was hatred or something else. I decided it was hatred. It was safer. I opened the notebook, and I started over. Chapter 2. Unbearable Old Man. 3 months later, I'd already memorized the name of each of the tower's 47 floors. The smell of the coffee from the 12th floor machine, burnt. The smell of the coffee from the 30th floor machine, decent. The accounting extension, the legal extension, the right way to fold the financial report so it would fit inside the briefcase without creasing the corner. And I'd memorized, most of all, the watch on Marco Rinaldi's left wrist. Not that he went around timing my late arrivals, because I hadn't been late a single time, but he timed other things. How long I took to answer a question, how long I took to get from my desk to the meeting room, how long I took to deliver a document he'd asked for 3 seconds earlier, as if he had a silent file open in his head, just for me, just for my minutes, just for every second I took longer than he deemed acceptable. That Friday, he walked into the 9:40 meeting with a face that promised blood. I was at the end of the table, with the quarterly report printed in 3 copies, and a 4th digital one open on my laptop. I'd worked on it until 3 in the morning, with my college notebook still open beside the keyboard, and the coffee going cold while I forgot to drink it. I'd redone the revenue chart because the previous one had 2 overlapping points that bothered the eye. I'd checked every line, every column, every total, by hand, in Excel, on the calculator, by hand again. He picked up the copy, flipped 3 pages, stopped on the 4th. Who did this report? I did. Who reviewed it? I did. He closed the report with a sharp gesture and pushed it lightly across the table, toward me. The folder slid across the dark wood surface with a low hiss that seemed louder than it should have. Line 7 of the 3rd column is adding up wrong. I looked. Line 7 of the 3rd column was correct. I knew it was correct because I'd checked it on the calculator, in Excel, and by hand, in a notebook, after the 2nd coffee, with the lamp's faint light so I wouldn't wake Lily sleeping in the next room. Mr. Rinaldi, excuse me, I checked. Check again. I checked. The line was correct. Sir, yes, it's adding up right. The whole room froze. I swear I heard someone take a deep breath. Marco looked at me for 1 second, 2, 3. His expression didn't change. There was no surprise, no visible anger, only that calm, sharp attention that irritated me more than any shout. Redo it anyway. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He He continued the meeting as if I weren't there anymore. And when the others left, I stayed seated because my legs weren't responding right, and my hands were busy gripping the edge of the laptop hard enough to leave a mark. Bruna appeared in the office doorway the moment the last man left. She looked at me, looked at the hallway, looked back at me. Come, Bruna, you have to come with me right now before you explode on this carpet and ruin the corporate flooring. Come. I went. She dragged me down the hallway, took the interior stairs instead of the elevator, and pushed me into the archive room of the 46th floor. A long room, with steel shelves up to the ceiling, black folders cataloged by year, and a smell of old paper and cold dust that I'd always found strangely comforting. At that moment, it smelled only of suffocation. Bruna closed the door. Vent. Bruna. Vent. Friend. I can see the vein in your forehead pulsing. Vent before it bursts. I breathed, looked at the ceiling, looked at the shelves, looked at her, and then it burst. He's unbearable, Bruna. Unbearable. I checked that line 3 times. 3 by hand. In Excel. On the calculator. It was right. And he told me to redo it because he wanted to watch me redo it. He does this. For 3 months. 3. I show up on time. He times me. I deliver on deadline. He finds fault. I get it right. He invents an error. What kind of man is this, Bruna? What kind of person wakes up in the morning and decides to pick on an employee just because he can? Friend? He's arrogant. That's what he is. An arrogant boss type. A guy who thinks that because he's got an Italian suit and an expensive watch, he can treat people like pawns. I work. I deserve respect. I'm not here to feed the ego of a middle-aged man with a power complex. Calla. Old. Bruna. Unbearable old man. Boring old man. Impossible old man. Acting like the world revolves around his schedule and his watch and his mood. Bruna went white. I didn't notice at the time because I was out of breath, my face hot, my hand gripping the edge of the shelf as if it owed me something. The metal was cold under my fingers. It took me a couple of seconds to register her expression. Wide eyes, open mouth, as if someone had switched off a light inside her. And then came the throat clearing. Slow, low, behind me. I closed my eyes. I thought, for a very long instant, that if I didn't turn around, maybe he'd disappear. That maybe it was just the air conditioning making a sound like a throat clearing. That maybe Bruna had that face for some other reason entirely. That maybe I still had 30 seconds to choose a new career. Bruna passed me like a shadow. She murmured something that might have been sorry, friend, and left the archive, leaving the door ajar behind her. The door closed, with a low click, but a definitive one. I turned around. Marco was leaning against the door, shoulder against the frame, hand in his trouser pocket, dark gray suit, black tie. The cold light of the archive lamps landed on him in a way that softened nothing. The angles of his face, the breadth of his shoulders, the firm line of his mouth, the expression I couldn't read because it was the first time in 3 months that he wasn't in a hurry to dismiss me. Mr. Rinaldi, go on. Excuse me? Go on. His voice came lower than usual, grazing the heavy silence of the room. I interrupted. I swallowed. Sir, Unbearable old man. He repeated each word as if savoring it, pausing on each syllable with a calm that was his sharpest weapon. Boring old man. Impossible old man. I didn't mean... You did. He took a step into the archive. I instinctively took a step back and hit the lower part of my back against the edge of the steel shelf. The folder on top swayed, grazing the metal with a low hiss. I didn't move to catch it. He took another step, took his hand out of his pocket. He didn't use it for anything, just let it fall by his side, with a calm that was worse than any abrupt gesture, worse than any raised voice. One more step. I could smell his cologne now. Dark wood, lemon, something of new leather that clung to my throat and wouldn't go away. I felt the heat of his body 3 centimeters from my shoulder. I felt that if I took a deep breath, a single deep breath, my collarbone would touch his chest. I didn't take a deep breath. He tilted his face. He didn't touch me, didn't graze me, didn't put his hand on the shelf beside my head like in the cheap movies I avoided watching. He just tilted his face until his mouth was a hair's breadth from my hair, and his breath traveled down the nape of my neck before his voice, warm and low and deliberate. Keep calling me old, he murmured, and see what happens. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I don't know if I existed for the next 3 seconds. He pulled away, slowly, as if giving me the exact amount of time to register that he'd been there and that he'd chosen to leave. He walked to the door, opened it, looked at me once more over his shoulder, not with anger, not with humor, with something I couldn't catalog even after trying several times. He left. The door closed again. I stayed pressed against the shelf for an amount of time I couldn't measure. When I started breathing again, it came all at once, with a sound that was more like choking than air coming in. The metal was cold against my back. The smell of his cologne was still in the air, dense enough to make me wonder if I'd invented the whole scene. I hadn't invented it. I sat on the archive floor, right there, with the pleated skirt creasing against the cold tile, knees bent, back against the lowest shelf. I covered my face. I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. It was something else, a pressure that didn't know where to escape. I spent the whole afternoon at my desk pretending to work, opened a spreadsheet, closed a spreadsheet, moved the cursor aimlessly, typed and deleted. Bruna didn't come to me. I didn't go to her either. We crossed paths near the coffee machine at 4:30, and she just squeezed my arm in passing and murmured, "Friend, we'll talk later," with a face that mixed solidarity with the shock of someone who still hadn't fully recovered. Marco didn't pass by my desk, didn't send an email, didn't call me into any room. It was the first Friday in 3 months that he left me in peace, and that was exactly what drove me crazy. The silence where I expected friction, the space where I expected pressure. I knew how to handle war. With this, I didn't. At 7, I grabbed my bag and left. Bruna had already gone down. The elevator was empty when I got in, and I looked at my reflection in the polished steel, the same as on the first day, the bun already coming undone, and the tie loose with an exhaustion that wasn't just physical. I didn't recognize the woman who looked back. The train was crowded. I pressed my forehead to the glass because it was the only thing that felt solid. The car swayed with that irregular rocking of old tracks. The lights flickered when we entered the tunnels, and for a few seconds I existed only in the dark and in the intermittent reflection of the glass. I tried to think of Lily, of my mother, of the rice I still had to cook, of the electric bill due on Monday, of the college reading list that was growing faster than I could keep up with. It didn't work. I thought of his tilted face, of the strand of my hair, of the breath that traveled down the nape of my neck, warm and controlled, like everything in him, of the word old held in his mouth, as if he'd found it amusing and infuriating at the same time, as if the two things could fit together without canceling each other out. I thought of the line, "Keep calling me old and see what happens." What happens? I didn't know what happened, and I knew, with a clarity that bothered me more than anything, that I wanted to find out. I gripped the strap of my bag. No, I didn't want to. I hated him. I'd hated him for 3 months. I'd hated him 5 hours ago. I hated him now, leaning against the glass of a packed car, with the mark of the steel shelf still aching in the lower part of my back, and the smell of his cologne stubbornly refusing to leave my memory. Hating was safe. Hating was what I knew how to do with Mr. Marco Rinaldi. It was what I'd practiced for 90 consecutive days, with almost professional dedication. And yet, for the first time in 3 months, when the car entered the dark, and my reflection appeared in the glass in front of me, I didn't see anger on the face of the woman who looked back. I saw fear, and I saw a third thing, beneath the fear, that I flatly refused to name. The train stopped at my station. I got off. I walked the 5 blocks home slowly, slower than usual, with my hand on the strap of my bag, and the bun completely undone now, my loose hair blowing against my face in the cold wind coming off the river at that hour of the night. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs in the building. I stopped in front of my door. I put my hand on the doorknob. I thought about Monday. I thought about him leaning against the frame of the archive door, about the way he'd repeated each word. Unbearable old man, boring old man, impossible old man, as if keeping each one, and about the way he'd looked at me over his shoulder before leaving, too calm, as if he already knew something I'd take a while longer to understand. And I knew, right there, with my cold hand on the doorknob and the wind still on the nape of my neck, that on Monday I would come back, and that he would be there, waiting. Chapter 3: The Man Behind the Suit. The following week began as if nothing had happened in the archive. I arrived Monday 7 minutes early, with the bun tighter than usual and the briefcase pressed against my chest like a shield. Bruna was at the lobby desk, with that half-guilty smile of someone who left her friend alone in a trap. She raised 2 eyebrows at me before I got into the elevator. I pretended not to see. On the 47th floor, no one said anything. Marco didn't show up in the morning, which gave me a strange truce, the kind you breathe without trusting. I completed the supplier spreadsheet, redid 2 reports they gave me without explanation, and answered 4 calls from reception to rearrange a meeting schedule that changed every hour. The whole day passed with that silent wait of someone waiting for something to happen without knowing what. It wasn't until Wednesday that I saw Marco again. A small meeting, the glass-walled conference room at the end of the hallway, an oval, dark oak table that seemed to swallow the cold ceiling light. There was Vincenzo Greco, the in-house lawyer I'd learned to recognize by the Italian sayings whispered between his words. Dante, the silent man who always accompanied Marco, 2 other executives whose names I hadn't managed to memorize, and Marco. Marco was at the head of the table. Graphite gray suit, no tie, the first 2 buttons of his shirt undone as if he'd forgotten to finish dressing. The onyx signet ring caught the light each time he spun the pen between his fingers. I sat in the chair nearest the door, the only spot where I'd be out of his direct line of sight. I was ignored for the first 20 minutes. When the report folder was finally passed his way, he held out his hand without looking. I slid the folder across the table. His hand crossed mine halfway. It wasn't a bump. It was a slow meeting, where his fingers touched mine for too long to be an accident, and where neither of us pulled back. His pen kept spinning between his other fingers, as if that touch weren't happening. I looked up. His eyes were already on mine, dark gray, expressionless, as if he were waiting for me to be the first to break the silence. I didn't break it. I let go of the folder, brought my hand back to my lap, and lowered my eyes to the notebook, pretending to write down something that didn't need writing down. I felt the heat rising up my neck anyway. Vincenzo cleared his throat lightly. "Marco," he said, with that drawled accent of his. "Andiamo." Marco lowered his gaze to the report. He continued the meeting as if nothing had crossed the air between the 2 of us, but I still felt the heat on the nape of my neck, and I knew he'd seen it. Maybe he'd been looking for it. The meeting ended at 4:40. I was the first to leave. Bruna dragged me to the ground floor cafe at coffee time, right in the middle of the day, even as I said I needed to get back to finish the spreadsheet for the Atlantic City projects. She said that if I didn't get off that floor for 15 minutes, she'd drag me by the hair. I went. We sat at the corner table, near the window that looked out onto a street wet with a fine drizzle. She ordered a cinnamon cappuccino. I ordered black coffee. The cafe was almost empty at that hour. Just 2 men in suits talking near the counter, and a young woman typing on a laptop with big headphones. Bruna leaned toward me and laced her fingers on the table like a grandmother about to gossip. "Friend, don't start. Friend. Bruna, he stopped picking on you," she said quietly. "Did you notice?" "I didn't notice anything. You noticed everything. Now he looks." I felt the blood rise up my neck. "He doesn't look. Friend, he looks in a way that drops the room temperature 2 degrees. And your face, when you walk through the door, goes red as a pepper left out in the sun. I've seen it happen 3 times this week. Bruna, stop. I'm just narrating what I see. I'm not making it up." I didn't answer. I stirred the coffee slowly with the spoon, even though I hadn't added sugar. Bruna smiled out of the corner of her mouth, in that way of hers of someone who'd won an argument before I'd even started losing it, and changed the subject to tell a story about the doorman of her building. I thanked her silently and looked out at the street, at the pedestrians hurrying past under the drizzle. That's when the phone vibrated in my bag. It was the neighbor. She called my cell phone directly when my mother couldn't. I answered, heard 3 words, dropped the coffee, and stood up. Bruna stood up with me. "What is it?" "My mother," I said. "Hospital. Emergency. Her heart." Bruna grabbed my bag, held my arm, and pushed me out onto the street before I could even think. She stopped a cab at the curb with a whistle that seemed to cut through the whole afternoon. She pushed me inside. She told the driver the name of the hospital without letting me open my mouth. "I'll cover with Vincenzo. Go." I went. The cardiac ICU was on the 4th floor. I arrived out of breath, with the bun undone, the blouse crumpled, and the college notebook still under my arm, because I hadn't managed to put it back in my bag. The nurse recognized me from previous nights and signaled for me to wait. The hallway smelled of alcohol and forced air conditioning. Lily was home with the neighbor. My mother was inside. I sat in the blue chair in the hallway, the same way I'd sat other times over the past few months. It was the chair of someone who waits. I rested the back of my neck against the cold wall and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was already night. The dead of night, actually. 2:40 in the morning, according to the clock above the double doors. The hallway was silent, with that tired yellow light hospitals use when most of the visitors have already gone home. I dozed off without realizing it, with the notebook still in my lap. A man passed through the hallway. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a nurse. He walked unhurried, with the upright posture of someone who'd learned to move in environments that weren't his own. I recognized him before his face even turned. Dante, black coat buttoned up to the collar, hands in his pockets, his eyes passing over me as if he already knew where I was. I'd called the office in the morning to say I'd be absent. Bruna must have passed it along. It was the only explanation that fit there, at 2:40 in the morning. He stopped 3 meters ahead. He didn't greet me. He looked toward the double doors, gave a slight nod to someone I couldn't see, and continued on. He vanished down the emergency stairs at the end of the hallway, and his footsteps faded slowly into the silence. I stayed staring at the place where he'd been. My heart beat once, hard, delayed by the surprise. Marco knew. I still didn't understand how or why he'd sent Dante there at 2:40 in the morning, but I knew that he knew, and I knew, too, that I wasn't going to ask. I left the hospital the next morning. I went home, changed clothes, gave Lily a bath, made myself coffee, and went to work. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I didn't have time. Marco didn't show up that day, or on Friday.
It was on Saturday that the message came, 4 in the afternoon, on my personal phone, from a number I'd never seen. The message said only, "Urgent matter, office, 10 p.m., use the side entrance, M." I read it 3 times. I didn't reply. At 9:30 at night I was on the train, with the same tight bun, the light gray blouse that was the closest thing to professional I had at home, and my heart beating at a rhythm I swore the whole of him could hear.
I got off at the right station, walked 2 blocks along the damp pavement to the glass tower, and went in through the side door using my badge. The doorman didn't stop me. It was as if he'd already been expecting me. The 47th floor was empty, only the light of Marco's office at the end of the hallway, crossing the frosted glass of the door like a yellow blur in the dark. I knocked twice. "Come in." I went in. He was standing near the window, with the city behind him like a switched-off backdrop. No suit, white shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbow, the signet ring shining under the low lamp. There was no paper on the desk. There was no urgent matter at all. I'd known since the message. "Sit," he said. I sat in the chair across from his desk. I clasped my hands in my lap like a girl summoned to the principal's office. Marco stayed standing for a few more seconds, his silhouette motionless against the city lights outside, then walked around the desk and sat on the edge of it, 1/2 meter from me. He rested his hands on the top. He didn't say anything for a while. Neither did I. "Your mother," he said, finally. "How is she?" I looked at his ring. It was easier than looking at his face. "Stabilized," I said. "But for now, you spend the nights at the hospital." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, with a contained anger underneath that I couldn't read. "When I need to." "How much?" "Marco." It was the first time I called him by his name. It came out without my meaning it to. He noticed. I noticed too. Neither of us said anything about it, but the air between the chair and the desk warmed by a couple of degrees, and I felt it on my skin with the same precision with which I felt the cold of the air conditioning. "You need to almost always," he added, before I could answer. "How do you know?" I asked, before I remembered to keep my tone flat. "Why did you send Dante there?" Marco breathed slowly. He didn't answer for a few seconds. When he spoke, it was lower. "Because I needed to know you were standing." There was a silence after that line that weighed more than anything he'd said to me in 3 months. I didn't know what to do with it. I looked at the window, at the city lights, at my own pale reflection in the frosted glass of the door behind me. "You don't owe me explanations," I said, quietly. "I know." "Then why are you giving me one?" He didn't answer. He leaned more heavily on the desk. "My father died when I was 15, he said, after a while. I didn't have a right to grieve. I had to take over everything the next day. I learned early that losing people is the price of loving people. That's why I stop loving before I start." I looked at him. He was looking at his own ring now, his thumb passing slowly over the dark stone like someone tracing an old scar. "You don't stop anything," I said, without thinking. He raised his eyes. He smiled, in a way that didn't come close to a smile, more like a recognition. "No." We fell silent again, for an amount of time that seemed too long and too short at the same time. The city breathed outside. I breathed in the chair. He breathed leaning against the desk, 1 meter from me, his hand closed over the top a few centimeters from my knee. "What's her name?" he asked. "Your sister. Lily." "Age?" I told him. He filed it away mentally. I saw the slight nod he gave, that brief gesture of someone storing information without needing paper. "And when do you sleep?" "When I can." "How much?" 4 hours, I said. When I can. He nodded slowly. He didn't comment. He got up from the desk. He walked to the office door and opened it, his hand holding the knob. I stood up, grabbed my bag, crossed the carpet slowly, feeling the office temperature change as I approached him, the heat of the ceiling lamp giving way to the coolness of the dark hallway. I stopped at the threshold. He didn't touch me. He didn't come close enough for that. He just stood there, with his hand on the knob, not looking at me. "Go rest," he said. I left. The door closed behind me with a low click. I went down the dark hallway to the elevator, pressed the button, waited, and only when the doors closed in front of my face did I realize my breathing was short. On the ground floor, I crossed the empty lobby. I went out through the side entrance. The street was quiet, with that wet silence of a Saturday late at night in downtown Philadelphia. The asphalt reflecting the streetlights in shallow puddles of orange light. A black car was parked at the curb, with the engine running. Dante got out from the driver's side. He didn't say hi. He opened the back door. I stopped. I tried to back away. "I'll take the train," I said. "Not at this hour. I always take the train." Dante didn't move. He kept his hand on the open door, his face expressionless, waiting. The night passed around the two of us as if it were timing the argument. "Dante," I insisted. "Orders," he replied. It was the only word he said to me all night. I looked up. At the window of the 47th floor, the light of Marco's office was still on. Behind the glass, I swore I could see a silhouette standing, looking at the street, at me. I got into the car. Chapter 4. The night everything changed. 2 weeks later, I no longer knew what my life was. Marco hadn't come to my desk a single time, but Dante waited for me at the company door every night I left after 8. No comment, no greeting, just the black car parked at the curb, the back door open, and his silence taking me to the hospital or home. I'd stopped arguing. Accepting the car was easier than waiting for the empty train and counting my steps to the station, while the November wind cut across the sidewalk with that dry coldness that slipped through the collar of my coat and never left again. Mom remained stable. College creaked in the background of the routine. Lily asked too many questions and slept too little. And Marco, at the office, looked at me as if waiting for a signal I myself didn't know was a signal. It was on a Thursday that everything turned. I was on the 47th floor, already past 5, closing the last spreadsheet of the day with my eyes already burning from exhaustion, when my personal phone vibrated in my bag. It was Lily. I answered with my heart already tight, because she never called my work phone at that hour. "Calla." Her voice came quietly, almost a whisper. "There's a man here at the door. He's shouting Mom's name." I froze. "Where's Mom?" "Lying down. She's scared." "Lock the door. Don't open it. Don't talk to him. I'm on my way." I left the spreadsheet open in the middle of the screen, grabbed my bag, ran down the hallway with my bun undone before reaching the elevator. Bruna saw me pass and got up from the desk. "Friend, what's wrong?" "Lily," I said, and it was all I could manage. On the ground floor, I didn't wait for a cab. I went out onto the street, stopped the first one that passed with my hand raised, told the driver the address, and pressed him to go faster. Philadelphia at that hour was jammed, and every stalled block cost air from my chest. I kept my eyes on the window, watching the traffic not move, my hand gripping the cell phone hard enough to leave a mark on my palm, Lily's voice repeating in my head softly, softly, like a sound that wouldn't fade. When the cab stopped at the curb, I threw the money through the window and ran out. The building was old, with no doorman, with a front door that never locked properly. I climbed the steps 2 at a time, smelled the familiar scent of old paint and damp carpet of the hallway, and heard his voice before I reached the second floor. "Helena, I know you're in there." My mother's name, being shouted in my hallway, by a man who had no right whatsoever to say it. Ray Halloran, the loan shark from the street down the block. My mother had taken money from him before the diagnosis, at a moment when she had nowhere to turn. I'd already paid back almost all of it. A little was left. I'd asked for an extension. He'd said yes. And now there he was, banging on my door in the middle of the afternoon, with the size of a man who took up the whole hallway. I reached the 3rd floor landing out of breath. He was standing in front of the door, his heavy hand banging on the wood. Dark coat, broad shoulders, the kind of man who took up space just by existing in the hallway. He turned to me when he heard me. "Look who showed up," he said, and smiled. "The little daughter. Get out of here. I'm not leaving until someone opens this door and pays me what I'm owed. I paid you 2/3. I asked for an extension. You said yes. I changed my mind, sweetheart." He took a step toward me, I didn't back away fast enough. He pushed me against the hallway wall, his forearm pressed against my shoulder. Not full force yet, just enough for me to feel the weight and understand the warning. The wall was cold and rough against my back, the peeling plaster grazing my jacket. Inside the apartment, Lily cried. "Take your hand off me," I said, quietly, because I'd learned early that with men like that you don't shout. Or what? I had no answer. It was at that instant that the hallway light changed. Someone was at the end of the hallway, near the stairs. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, without moving my head. Black coat, tall shadow, unhurried steps, with that specific cadence of someone who'd never run in his life and would never need to run. Ray felt the air change before he even turned. When he turned, Marco was already 5 meters away, Dante behind him, faster than I imagined it possible to cross Philadelphia at that hour, as if he'd already been on the street before I even called from the cab with my hand trembling on the green button. Marco kept walking until he stopped a meter from the loan shark, his coat open, the white shirt under the dark gray suit, and his cell phone still in his hand. The signet ring caught the yellow light of the hallway bulb and shone. He didn't look at me. He looked only at Ray, and that look was the kind of thing that needed very little to turn into an irreversible problem. Marco didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Do you know who I am?" Ray went pale. It was visible. His skin lost color in 3 seconds. The forearm dropped from my shoulder as if he'd forgotten he was pinning me to the wall. He took half a step back. His mouth tried to start a sentence, and no sentence came out. "Mr. Rinaldi," he said, finally, his voice too high. "I didn't know what, that she, say it." Ray swallowed hard. He couldn't finish the sentence. Marco raised the phone, dialed 3 numbers without looking, brought it to his ear. He waited for 1 ring. When they answered, he said a sentence in Italian of 4 or 5 words I didn't understand, followed by a name, Halloran, and hung up. He looked at the loan shark the way you look at an insect. "Your debt no longer exists. Sir, if I see you again, near this building, near this door, near this family, near this street, near this city, you won't exist anymore either." Ray turned and left down the stairs. He didn't walk down. He went down half running, his hand scraping the railing, and slammed the front door so hard I heard it from the 3rd floor. The hallway fell silent. I stayed pressed against the wall for another 5 seconds without being able to move, feeling my heart beat in my neck, in my fingertips, everywhere at once. The air smelled of old dust and rain that hadn't fallen yet. Marco came to me unhurried. He didn't touch me. He stopped half a meter away, with his hands in the pockets of his coat, and observed me as if counting whether I was whole. "You're okay?" It wasn't a question. "I am. Lily. Inside." He nodded toward the door. I picked up the key that had fallen on the floor and opened it. Lily was curled up on the couch with the quilt over her head, and Mom sitting on the back of the same couch, white as paper, with her hand over her chest. I ran to Lily first, picked her up, kissed her forehead, rocked her slowly saying it was over, that the man had gone, that he wasn't coming back. She smelled of strawberry shampoo and sleep. I closed my eyes for a second and stayed there, with her weight in my arms, trying to make my heart slow down. When I looked up, Marco was sitting on the floor in front of the couch, at Lily's level, without his coat. Dante must have collected it in the hallway without my seeing, and with his hands resting on his knees like someone waiting to be accepted. He spoke quietly, with a calm I'd never imagined in him. "Hi, Lily." She peeked over my shoulder. "Hi, I'm Marco. I work with your sister. Are you her boss?" Marco raised an eyebrow. "When I am. She talks about us when she gets home." "I imagine she does." Lily thought for a second, and buried her face in my neck again. I couldn't laugh because I was still trembling. Marco then turned to my mother. He stood up slowly, adjusted his shirt cuff in a gesture that seemed more habit than vanity, and approached her with both hands visible, the way you approach someone who's afraid. He sat in the armchair across from the couch and looked her in the eyes. My mother lifted her chin, even with her short breath, even with her hand on her chest. There was something in her posture that reminded me of where I'd learned not to back away. "Mrs. Donovan, Mr. Rinaldi, I'm going to take care of this. No one is ever going to knock on your door again, ma'am." She studied him for a long time. I held my breath. "You have the eyes of a man who's already lost too much," she said, quietly. Marco didn't look away. He accepted the sentence with his head bowed, with a small nod, like someone receiving a fair verdict. "Yes, ma'am," she sighed. She leaned back on the couch again. She closed her eyes. I was still holding Lily, and Lily had already begun breathing more slowly against my neck. Marco stood up in silence. I took Lily to her room, tucked her in, kissed her, turned off the lamplight, left only the hallway lamp on. The apartment was quiet the way it only gets when the danger has passed, and the body still doesn't believe it. I went back to the living room and Marco was no longer there. He was in the kitchen, putting water on the stove, with his back to me, as if it were the most natural thing in his world. The kitchen bulb was faint, and the light fell over his shoulders with that yellowish tone that made everything more honest, more tired, more real. I pulled him by the arm. "Come with me." He came. The apartment's balcony was small, with a view of 2 ugly buildings and a narrow strip of lead-colored sky. The air was cold, with that smell of wet asphalt and iron that Philadelphia has after 6 in the evening in November, when the city decides to remember that winter is coming. I closed the door behind us, leaned against the railing, looked at him. "Who are you really?" He rested his hand on the railing, beside mine, his fingers less than a centimeter from mine. He didn't touch me. "What you're thinking. Say it." And worse, I looked at him for a long time, at the suit crumpled for the first time since I'd known him, at the signet ring, at the way he'd sat on my living room floor in front of a child as if it cost a man like him nothing, and how it cost everything, at the way my mother had looked at him and he'd bowed his head. "Why did you come?" "Because you didn't ask." "I don't understand." He didn't answer. He looked down, at his own ring, his jaw tightening into a line I already knew how to read. The silence between us weighed more than the cold. Down below, on the street, some car passed with the music loud and vanished around the corner. Neither of us moved. Marco, because I can't not go. It was the most sincere thing he'd said to me in 3.5 months, and it was the thing that brought me down. I took a step. He didn't back away. I put my hand on his chest, in the place where his heart beat too fast for a man who seemed to control everything, and I kissed him. No games, no question. He took a second to respond, as if he needed to be sure it was real. Then he rested his hand on my face, slowly, and returned the kiss. It was short. It was calm. It was the first thing between the two of us without a fight. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. He stayed there in silence for an instant, without letting me go, and without pulling me closer. "I've admired you since the first day," he said, quietly. "I've wanted you since the first day, but I knew it was forbidden. Me, too old. Me, too dangerous. Me, the size that I am, and you, the size that you are in your life." I laughed breathlessly. "Unbearable old man." He laughed too. It was the first time, a short, low laugh that came out more like a sound of surprise than of joy, as if he'd forgotten how to do it. I looked at him with an absurd urge to cry and to kiss him again at the same time, and I did neither. We went back inside. He helped me cover my mother on the couch, with the care of someone handling something fragile. He went to Lily's room and checked the window, adjusted the quilt over her shoulder, and stood there 2 seconds watching her sleep, with that closed-off expression of someone feeling more than he knows how to name. I left the room before him and waited in the hallway, with my back against the wall and my arms crossed, not quite understanding what to do with how much that scene had moved me. When he came back to the living room, he grabbed his coat. I followed him to the kitchen. He stopped at the table, took a pen from his pocket, scribbled a phone number on a scrap of paper. He placed the paper under the sugar bowl with deliberate precision, as if it were a contract. "Anything," he said. "At any hour. You don't need to explain. Call." "Okay." He looked at me for another second. He didn't kiss me again. He walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold, with his hand on the frame, and looked back. "I'm going to sleep out front, in the car, tonight, just in case. Don't come down. Don't ask. I'm already going." He left before I could answer. I stayed standing in the kitchen for a long time, with my hand over the sugar bowl, and my heart beating at a rhythm that didn't obey me. The faucet dripped slowly in the silence. Down below, on the street, I knew the black car was already parked at the curb. I knew Dante was at the wheel. I knew, without needing to look out the window, without needing to confirm. I knew as if I'd known for a long time. When I finally lowered my gaze, I realized I was smiling, and that for the first time in 3.5 months I wasn't afraid of what it meant. Chapter 5. Love Grows Where Hatred Used to Be. I woke before the alarm, as always, but for the first time in months it wasn't fear that pulled me from sleep. It was a low sound on the street, the engine of a big car, parked, with the heat running against Philadelphia's cold. I pressed my forehead to the kitchen window glass and looked down. Marco's car was still there, in the same spot where he'd parked in the dead of night, with the interior light off and his silhouette reclined in the driver's seat, motionless. He'd kept his word. He'd slept in front of the building as he'd promised, suit and all, as if the whole world fit inside the word anything written on the paper under the sugar bowl. I didn't know what to do with it. I put the kettle on the stove and stood watching the blue flame rise, trying to understand at what moment my life had decided to turn upside down. The apartment was silent in the way that only exists very early, before any street noise rose through the window, before Lily started stirring under the covers, a silence that seemed to be waiting for something. Lily woke first, barefoot and disheveled, and came to the kitchen doorway rubbing her eyes. She stopped at the frame and stared at me with a seriousness out of proportion to her size. "Is the angry man down there?" she asked. "He is. In the car. In the car." Lily pursed her lips in that way of hers when she was trying to understand something too big. "Then he's not so angry." I sent her to brush her teeth before I cried in front of my sister for the first time in 3 months. I heard the tiny footsteps fading down the hallway, and sat in the kitchen chair, holding the warm mug between my hands, feeling the heat of the porcelain rise through my palms. Trying to remember how I breathed before Marco Rinaldi came into my life. I couldn't. I went down with Lily an hour later. He got out of the car the moment he saw us, still in his dark suit with the jacket crumpled on the left side from sleeping leaned over, and opened the back door as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lily got in without asking anything. I got in after ow, and he closed the door carefully, with that precise firmness he had for everything, as if we were something delicate he didn't want to crack. "Hospital?" he asked, adjusting the rearview mirror to see me. "Hospital." Marco drove in silence, and I noticed that his silence had changed in nature. Before it was armor, now it was listening. He waited for me to say something when I was ready, and as long as I wasn't, he simply held the wheel with his right hand and left his left open over the gear shift, near my leg, without touching. The city passed outside the window still asleep, shops closed, sidewalks deserted, the Philadelphia sky with that white early morning color that never promised real sun. I leaned in, rested 2 fingers on his wrist, near the expensive watch, and he let the air out through his nose, as if I'd undone an old knot. At the hospital, he came up with me to the 3rd floor and stopped in the hallway of the cardiac ward, leaning against the wall across from my mother's room. He didn't go in. He said he didn't want to intrude on what was mine. I went in, held Helena's hand, talked about small things, the coffee she'd had, whether the bed was good, whether the night nurse had been nice. When I came out, an hour later, he was still there, in the same spot, suit crumpled, hair a little messed up from where he'd run his hand through it, looking at his watch with no rush at all to hurry me. "I brought coffee," he said, holding out a paper cup. "You stood this whole time." "I did." "Why?" He looked at me with that frightening calm he only used with me, his eyes dark and quiet on my face. "Because someone needs to stay standing while you can't." I didn't know how to answer. I drank the coffee to hide that I'd lost my breath, and the 2 of us walked down the hallway in silence, with the antiseptic smell of the hospital around us, and the distant sound of a medicine cart rolling on the floor above. That same week, on Wednesday, the doctor on duty called me into her office after the visit. My mother had been hospitalized since the heart episode, now stable, but still under observation. The doctor sat in front of her desk, opened a folder, and explained to me that the hospitalization bill had been paid in full, including 2 new exams she'd ordered that morning. I looked at her without understanding. Paid by whom? She took off her glasses and looked at me with a courtesy that had begun 3 months too late. "Mrs. Donovan, someone paid for everything. I can't go into details. I can only tell you that you no longer need to worry about the costs of the treatment. None of them." I left the office with the folder in my hands and my knees weak. I went down in the elevator, crossed the lobby with the muffled noise of voices and wheelchairs, and found Marco leaning against the car outside. He straightened up the moment he saw me. I stopped 3 steps from him. "It was you." He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He just looked at me with his chin slightly raised, as if waiting for the tone of my voice to know whether he'd get a punch or a hug. "I didn't ask," I said. "I know. I don't want to owe anything to anyone." "You don't. It's not a debt." "What is it, then?" He let the air out slowly, and the white rose through the cold between the 2 of us, vanishing into the air. "It's what I can do, and I'm not going to pretend I can't, just because your pride prefers it that way." I wanted to fight. I had 4 sentences ready on the tip of my tongue, each firmer than the last. None of them came out. Instead, I took 2 steps forward, rested my forehead on his chest, and closed my eyes. He covered me with his arm without asking permission, and I let him. I felt the warm coat and his heart beating slowly beneath the fabric, and I thought that for a man his size that was a surprisingly calm rhythm. The following Friday, Bruna dragged me to the ground floor cafe during lunch. She sat across from me, stacked 3 sugar packets in the coffee she'd already sweetened, and looked at me with the most serious face I'd ever seen on her. Friend, do you know what you're getting into? I opened my mouth to answer and closed it. Bruna wasn't gossiping. She was genuinely worried, and I recognized Bruna's worry because it always came accompanied by 3 packs of cookies she'd pushed toward me, without asking if I wanted them. I do, I said. You really do. I know what he is, Bruna. I know what this means. And even so, she fell silent for a long time. She looked at the coffee. She looked at me. She raised her eyebrows and lowered them, her face going through at least 4 different emotions without settling on any of them. Okay, then promise me one thing. What? Promise that if he hurts you, I get to use my cousin's baseball bat. I laughed for the first time the whole lunch. Promise? I promise. Helena was discharged 10 days later, earlier than anyone expected. The doctor said it was one of the fastest recoveries she'd seen in that case, and that, yes, she could attribute it to non-clinical factors: absence of financial stress, regular sleep, adequate nutrition. I understood every word for what it was: another silent installment from Marco that I didn't even know was being paid. I took Mom home on an afternoon of low sun, the kind of late winter Philadelphia sun that warms less than it promises, but is already enough to make the city look slightly less gray. Marco came up with me to the apartment, carrying the bag of medicines without saying a word. Helena stopped in the living room doorway before going in, turned to him, and stared at him with the clarity that no illness had managed to take from her. You, she said, slowly. Ma'am, take care of my daughter, but take care of her the way she deserves, not the way you think she deserves. Marco bowed his head once. Yes, ma'am. Helena smiled the smallest smile in the world, and went in. That Saturday, he took me to see his house. It was on the other side of the city, in a tree-lined neighborhood I'd never had any reason to cross. The house was big, but not absurd. Dark brick, tall windows that let in all the late afternoon light, and a small, newly planted cherry tree in the front garden, its thin trunk still supported by a wooden stake. He parked in front of the gate, got out, opened the door for me, and led me by the hand with the calm of someone who'd rehearsed it in his head for weeks. The kitchen was enormous. One of those kitchens where my mother could fit sitting and embroidering, and Lily doing homework at the table, and there'd still be room for 3 people cooking at the same time. Light marble counter, 2 windows facing the garden, the smell of old wood and of a house that was waiting for noise. He showed me the living room, the back porch with 2 chairs facing the cherry tree, and stopped in front of a door on the 2nd floor, his hand on the knob. This is Lily's room, he said. I looked at him. What? He opened the door. There was a bed covered with a light duvet in a soft yellow tone, a low shelf with new children's books, the price tags still hanging from the spines, a moon-shaped lamp on the bedside table, and a window facing the garden from which the cherry tree was visible, exactly at the height of a child looking out while standing. How did you... Bruna, he said, without looking away. I asked her to tell me what your sister liked. 2 weeks ago. Don't be mad at her. I insisted, and she only agreed when I promised it was for a room, not for anything else. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I leaned against the hallway wall because my knees were no longer doing their job. The hallway was silent, with the smell of new paint and freshly waxed wood, and I stood looking at the finished room, at every small detail someone had chosen carefully for a child who didn't yet know she'd be living there, and I couldn't find a single word that fit it all. He left me in silence for a whole minute. When I composed myself, he took the key from his jacket pocket and held it out in the palm of his hand. Just one key. No keychain. No flourish. No speech. You bring your mother. Bring Lily. It's safe here. Marco, I'm not asking for anything in return. Calla, I'm offering a place where no loan shark can knock on the door, where your mother can sleep without hearing the neighbor shout, where Lily can run in the garden without anyone paying attention. You take the key or you don't. I'll respect either one. I looked at his hand. I looked at his face. I looked at the cherry tree down below, on the other side of the window, swaying slowly against the afternoon sky with that slow movement of something still learning to stay in place. Yes, I said, quietly. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he took a step forward and placed the key in my hand. closing my fingers over it with his thumb, as if sealing something neither of us could name yet. "Old man," I whispered. He laughed low, against my temple. "Go on." We kissed in front of the window of my sister's room, and it was the slowest kiss of my entire life. No rush at all, no proof at all, nothing beyond the weight of the decision that had just been made between the two of us, in silence, in a room prepared for a child who didn't even know yet that she'd be living there. His hand moved up to the nape of my neck, his fingers opening slowly through my hair. Mine rested on his chest and stayed there, feeling each breath of his against my palm. I felt his heart beat fast, out of rhythm, human, nothing of the Don the city feared, only a man who had just been accepted by a woman who'd sworn to hate him for 3 months and who, without knowing exactly when, had stopped being able to. When night fell, he turned off the hallway light, and I went with him. The door of the master bedroom closed behind the two of us without a sound. I woke before him. The morning light came through a gap in the curtain and drew a clear line on the wooden floor. Marco slept beside me, calm breathing, his hand stretched out in my direction, as if even while sleeping he hadn't given up on reaching me. I stayed looking for an amount of time I couldn't measure. The room was quiet, with that specific silence of early morning in a new house, different from the silence of my apartment, without the noise of the pipe in the wall, without the next-door neighbor turning on the television before 6. It was the first time in 3 months that I saw him without weight, without armor, without the city on his back, without the watch timing, without the suit cut in Milan, without the signet ring on his finger. Just a 44-year-old man breathing slowly against a white pillow, with gray threads at his temples and a thin scar on his shoulder I hadn't noticed before. He opened his eyes without a start, as if he'd felt that I was awake, and looked at me in silence from the other side of the pillow. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning. Do you always sleep like this?" "Like what?" Without pretending. He took a second. Then he stretched out his hand and rested it on my face, and his thumb traced the bone of my cheek, as if memorizing the path. "Only with you." Chapter 6. The Key in the Palm of My Hand. Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the night, he handed me the key. The sun came through the gaps in the curtain and struck the light wooden floor as if the house had waited for that light its whole life. I got up slowly, put his coat on over my nightgown and went down. The staircase smelled of new wood and old coffee, and I'd already decided that would be my favorite smell for the rest of my life. The doorbell rang shortly after 9. I opened the door and my mother was there, leaning on Lily, thinner than she should be, but with steady eyes. Behind them, Dante carried 2 suitcases that seemed to weigh less in his arms than they would in any other man's. Helena looked inside the house, at the high ceiling, at the window that looked out onto the garden, and rested her hand on the doorframe. She didn't cry out loud. She just bowed her head and let the tears fall without complaining about them. "Mom," I whispered. "I'm fine, honey." Her voice trembled only once. "It's just that it's been a long time since I walked into a house without fear." Lily ran past between us, barefoot before reaching the end of the hallway, and shouted something about a tree. She found the cherry tree Marco had ordered planted, and hugged it as if it were a person. My mother laughed quietly, and it was a sound I hadn't heard in 2 years. Dante appeared with the suitcases, set everything down near the stairs without saying a word, winked once at me, and left the same way he'd come. I took my mother to the downstairs bedroom. She ran her hand over the quilt, the lamp, the glass of water on the bedside table. She sat on the bed carefully and said she was going to rest just a little. I closed the door and stayed outside it for a second, with my forehead pressed to the wood. Marco was already in the kitchen when I came back, barefoot, pajama pants, white t-shirt. For the first time he didn't look like a Don, or a boss, or the most feared man in Philadelphia. He looked just like the owner of that coffee warming on the stove. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." He came slowly, rested his hand on the nape of my neck, fit his forehead against mine, and stayed there a while breathing the same air I breathed. "I keep calling me old," he murmured, "and see what happens. Old man." He laughed quietly, against my mouth, and kissed me with no rush at all. It was a Sunday morning kiss, the kind that asks for nothing in return. Lily ran in shouting that the cherry tree had a sprout. Helena called from the living room asking where the quilt was. His private phone rang once on the counter. He glanced away but didn't answer. He just turned it face down on the marble. The whole afternoon passed like that. Boxes opened, books finding a new shelf, Lily testing each step of the staircase as if measuring the size of her own luck. Marco made a simple lunch with Helena beside him, listening to an old recipe from her as if it were the most important secret in the world. When night fell, Lily slept in the new room, and my mother breathed slowly downstairs. I went out to the garden alone. The city shone far away. From here, it looked too small to have frightened us for so long. Marco came up behind me. He draped his coat over my shoulders without saying anything and hugged me by the waist. His breath traveled down the nape of my neck like that first time in the archive. But now it didn't come with a warning. It came with arrival. I closed my eyes, and it was in that second that the thought crossed without asking permission. It was strange, I thought for half a second, as if the calm of that night were too big for a man his size, and I pushed it away. I opened my eyes. The lights far away kept flickering. His hand was warm on my waist. Lily slept. My mother breathed. Not today. I pushed the thought away like someone pushing away a curtain that moved without wind. I rested my head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," I lied. He held me a little tighter against his chest and kissed the top of my head. The two of us stayed there, looking at a city that for the first time in 27 years of my life seemed to fit inside a single window. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I really believed the worst was already behind us. My mother was recovering, with the hospital bills miraculously paid. My sister Lily was finally smiling again, with someone discreetly watching the door of her school. And the man I called old had become the center of my world. Then, overnight, Marco Rinaldi destroyed everything. He looked me in the eyes and said I'd never been anything more than a convenient distraction, that I was just another young thing he wanted to try. And now that he'd gotten me, he discarded me like any other. He announced his engagement to Serena Costa at a packed event, his arm around her waist, and a cold smile I'd never seen before. He walked into the bedroom with her the moment I got home. He had me thrown out of the apartment like I was trash, changing the locks and putting me straight out on the street, leaving me crying with my suitcases on the sidewalk. I tried to move on. I tried to hate him with every fiber of my being. But the more time passed, the more the pieces didn't fit. Payments that kept arriving. Invisible protections that no one would admit to. Silences that smelled of secrets. Because some lies are created to deceive. Others are created to protect. And when I finally discovered the reason Marco let me go, I realized the truth was far more devastating than the betrayal I'd spent months reliving every night. Why did he choose to break me? With another woman, if all he wanted was me. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, This is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.